Hi, everybody. You're also welcome to this very important seminar and session. We might just wait about 30 seconds to a minute because there are a lot of people coming, going to be a lot of people here today. But while we wait for them, I would just like to welcome you all. In my own experience, this is a subject I've covered a lot as a journalist here in RT and in different aspects of my career, and it's one very close to my heart. So I think it's going to be a very important, a great lineup of speeches and a great lineup of speakers, and we'll be asking lots of interesting questions. So look, I think if it's okay with everyone, we'll start. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this special panel discussion, What More Can Men Do? Men Ending Gender-Based Violence. It's hosted by the White Ribbon Ireland campaign and Munster Technological University. I'm, of course, your host and your moderator, and I'm Miriam O'Callaghan. Well, throughout the past 20 months, I don't need to tell all of you about this COVID pandemic. There have been increased reports, both nationally and internationally, unfortunately, of sexual, domestic, and gender-based violence, especially amongst women and girls. Statistics alone from Women's Aid for 2020, they indicate that they received 24,893 disclosures of domestic violence and abuse here in Ireland, which is pretty staggering. 855 disclosures of sexual abuse, including 340 instances of rape. And last year alone on Garda Síochána, they also received an estimated 43,500 calls to respond to domestic abuse incidents. So we can see from that the scale of this problem. This is the context which brings us all together today to discuss ahead of International White Ribbon Day, tomorrow, November the 25th. And today is an opportunity to reflect, discuss, and to analyse. Again, as I said, what more can men do to end violence against women and gender-based violence? I'm delighted to be joined by a very high-profile panel across civil society, advocacy, academia, policing, sport, and the trade union movement for what's going to be a very important conversation at this critical juncture, I think, in the battle to end gender violence. And our panelists for today's conversation are Cooke, who's CEO of Men's Development Network, Dr. Shawna Coxon, Deputy Commissioner on Garda Síochána, David Joyce, Equality and International Development Officer, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, John Meyler, MTU lecturer, and of course, former exceptionally brilliant Cork Hurling Manager, McDowell, activist and founding member of Stalking Ireland, and David Meyler, again, a brilliant footballer, Ireland under-17s coach now as well, and former professional soccer player. But look, before we start in discussing and asking questions, this week it marks a really important development for MTU. I know everyone in there is so proud, and I'm very proud of it. It's becoming the first white ribbon university on this island. And before we get in to the discussion and the questions, would you please give a very warm welcome to the president there, Maggie Cusack. Hi, Maggie.
Thank you so much, Miriam, and good afternoon, everyone. I am privileged to be here today as president of Munster Technological University to open this very important panel discussion partnering with Men's Development Network. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to each of you, and I'd like to particularly welcome our distinguished panel and, of course, our moderator, Miriam O'Callaghan, who is a White Ribbon Ambassador for the Irish campaign. So today's event begins our process at MTU towards becoming a White Ribbon University. And White Ribbon University accreditation demonstrates to staff, students, stakeholders, and the wider community that we are committed to gender equality and to creating a safe place of work and study for everyone. So I am very proud that MTU will be the first university across the island of Ireland to achieve this accreditation. Violence against women and gender-based violence are abuse of human rights, criminal offences and immoral acts which must be ended. So MTU and the Men's Development Network, I think, have much in common, and specifically promoting change and equality within society. Both MTU and the Men's Development Network strive to build a culture where women do not experience violence and abuse. And by doing this, we're creating a safer and healthier space for women, men, and diverse identities. Our work, as part of the broader equality, diversity, and inclusion strategy in MTU, also focuses on ending violence for non-binary people, members of the LGBTQI+ community, including men and boys of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities who are seen as defying gender norms. I'm really grateful that MTU has been afforded the opportunity to collaborate with the Men's Development Network on their vital work in advancing the aims of the White Ribbon campaign, in raising awareness and engaging with men to end gender-based violence. White Ribbon Day is also known as the International Day for the Eradication of Violence Against Women. And I think that this panel event is very timely, as Miriam mentioned. So unfortunately, both globally and in Ireland, domestic violence has risen since the outbreak of COVID-19. Domestic violence services here in Ireland have reported that almost 4,000 women and 600 children who had never contacted them previously have looked for support and safety from abuse and coercive control during the first 6 months of COVID-19 from March to August last year. Other stark statistics show that 1 in 4 women in Ireland are targeted during their lifetime by current or former partners. And more horrifically, 1 in 5 women will have been abused by the time they're just 25 years old. 1 in 5. Violence against women occurs across many cultures and communities. It takes many forms, including physical, sexual, social, emotional, cultural, spiritual, and financial abuse. And it also includes a wide range of controlling, coercive, and intimidating behaviour. Other forms of abuse include threats, social isolation, and these can be enough to impact a person's behaviours and cause them to be fearful. Women often describe these non-physical forms of abuse as being severely damaging to their self-esteem, their independence, and their well-being. Mm-hmm. So finally, to promote positive change and help end violence against women, staff across all our campuses in MTU will be taking part in the White Ribbon Day, which, as Miriam mentioned, is tomorrow, the 25th of November. It's clearly incumbent on us all to live up to that white ribbon pledge, never to commit, condone, or remain silent about gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that, President Cusack. Exactly, it's the silence, I think, sometimes that people need to do more about, and we're all, I think, slightly guilty of that. I'm going to start the questions. I don't know where to start because I've got so many interesting people. I think I'll start with Sean Cooke, who, of course, Sean, you're the CEO of the Men's Development Network and White Ribbon Ireland campaign. MDN, you've been the lead organisation of White Ribbon Ireland since 2010. And next year, MDN looks forward, I know, to celebrating your 25th anniversary as an organisation. Today is really, I suppose, Sean, asking what more can men do? Other days there's different questions, but it's really, I suppose, focusing on what men can do to end, this gender violence and violence against women. Can you please share with us, as a men's organisation, Sean, why are the Men's Development Network engaged in this work when it comes to ending VAW and GBV?
Cheers, Miriam, and thank you very much for the introduction, and also to Maggie for our wonderful introduction to the event. And we are delighted as well to be partnering with MTU on this special occasion and them reaching white ribbon status. As an organisation, we established ourselves 25 years ago, and it was very much around a group of men coming together to support each other around being their best selves or being their most authentic selves. And from that, the range of work grew to where we got involved in health work, also in the developmental work, but also in terms of gender equality and addressing the issue of gender-based violence. And it is really interesting that a good couple of years ago, a colleague of yours, now passed, Miriam O'Callaghan, wrote an article in the Irish Times one day about an incident where she came across a woman who was homeless with her children and a victim of domestic abuse, and was waiting on a bridge to gain access to some services on Bagga Street. And when she talked to this lady over the day and taught her, the question that she had at the end of the article was, well, where are all the men in this? Okay, where are the men, those men who know, who are quality men and know what they're about? Where are they in terms of trying to address this issue? Because that woman, everywhere she went to, it was a women's services that you would have. And she was kind of asking that question and posing that question. And at the time, the previous CEO here and the staff kind of said, well, listen, we need to step up here. We need to kind of provide a lead and model our behaviors in a way in which other men can follow, and that we can try and address the issue of gender-based violence. And the critical thing, the reasons why we're in it, is very much around trying to create the opportunities for men to be their most authentic selves. Okay, and we know that there are certain aspects of where being their most authentic selves is difficult to do as a man in modern day society. There are other pressures that are placed upon men in terms of the social conditioning aspects in relation to that, and also then just the experience, the cultural attitude towards violence across the country and across wherever it may be. And I think it's really interesting that when we try to engage men and boys around this issue, it is around inviting them into a conversation as opposed to pointing a finger. And I think that's a critical way that we try to engage with men and boys, and we try to use that strengths-based approach and transformative approach to ensure that we kind of, when men come into the discussion, that they don't feel threatened or unsafe or whatever, that they actually realize that they are also part of the certain aspects of the patriarchy that don't work for men as well, and that we need to find a way to allow them into that conversation where there's no sense of shame or judgment, and that they can really actively become allies to the women in our lives and around the country in terms of addressing this particular issue. And I think that's the critical reasons why we're here and why we do this.
And you know what's interesting, Sean, I'm just going to stay with you for a moment, because every man on this call, and probably all the men you know in your lives, my father, my brother, my sons, all the men I know are gentle. And yet we know statistically this is a huge issue. So do you have problems sometimes getting men involved because they find it hard to understand, when they themselves are not violent, that this is such a big problem? Is that a hard leap for some men?
I think it's an enormous leap. And I think some of it's based around that social conditioning that exists, you know, to be self-reliant, to be stoic, to be in charge, to be the provider, the breadwinner. All of these various different kind of social conditions are placed upon men, and not to be emotionally available or empathetic, to not show their vulnerability. These things are critical blockages to allow men to be their most authentic selves and to allow them into the conversation. The greatest kind of blockage that we come across is that some men are, and boys especially, when they find that they are challenged by even challenging somebody else's attitude. You know, what is the most appropriate way in which to engage in, to kind of confront somebody in a non-aggressive and non-adversarial way, to point out, actually, you know, what you've said there is not appropriate, you know, and ask them and give them the opportunity to reflect on it, rather than saying, that's a terrible thing to say, you shouldn't be saying that. There's various different ways in which to approach it. And so we have these 3 steps that we talk about, where men need to step into the conversation and listen to the women in their lives and their experience in relation to it. They need to step up, okay, and they need to step up and confront the behaviors and attitudes that they hear in a way that's not putting them at risk. And also it's another to step up and even to take on significant roles within the home. You know, that the caring roles that they need to step up and take some of those unpaid caring roles as well within the home. And then finally, they need to step back sometimes and listen and reflect on their own privilege in terms of working with women and developing allyship. And they're the critical things that we try to kind of instill and offer practical steps for men to engage in these conversations. And I think it is around now, without judgment. I was at another webinar last week, and it seems strange when we talk about kind of engaging men and boys. The way that we need to do this to engage them in this particular topic has to be with compassion, has to be with understanding that there's other things that are blockages to them to engaging with this, and that sometimes they are frightened, they are unsafe.
Yeah.
About what the reaction might be.
That's really interesting, Sean. I'll be back to you later on when we get more mixing all the questions. I'd like to talk to Deputy Commissioner Coxon now. Question for you, Shawna. I mean, you've recently been appointed to your role in Garda Síochána, and you previously held the role of Deputy Chief of Police in Toronto. Will you share with us, Shawna, if you don't mind, your experience from Canada when it comes to responding to sexual, domestic and gender-based violence, and perhaps how this approach may be different to that taken here in Ireland?
Well, thank you so much, Miriam, and thank you for having me here today. I think it's such an important conversation, and I really appreciate following Sean, because that discussion around what's expected societally and how important it is to approach this with compassion, I just think it's such an important conversation, because it is an issue without borders. There's no doubt about it. We are seeing increases in Canada as well as here in Ireland with respect to gender-based violence over the course of COVID. And really, in some ways, as challenging as that is, I think it says a lot, because we know that women typically don't phone police, regardless of where they're situated, whether it's Canada or Ireland, until they've experienced abuse more than 30 times. And so, last year, Garda Síochána received more than 17% of an increase in terms of people calling with respect to domestic violence. And so this is an issue without borders. And I think what COVID has done has brought together the issue in terms of bringing it to the forefront, because the course of control aspects, lockdown was not the same for everyone. And we saw particular vulnerabilities, particular issues coming to the surface. And so I think that really these things have been happening, and yet it was, more extreme during COVID, and it's brought it to light. And I think that as awful as that is, it's an opportunity for us to really take a look at it as a society and say, what is it that we need to do? And I can tell you that with respect to Garda Síochána, I'm very proud of the fact that there's a ton of proactive work that's been done in this space. And the proactive work includes, for example, the 16 days of action, which commences today. And, that is really about creating awareness and showcasing the need for discussion around this issue. And that's why I'm really excited to be here today. I think it's very timely in terms of what's happening around the country at large. In addition to that, we have been running for approximately a year Operation Físhif, which has been a proactive response to domestic violence. And that has been about following up with people who have reported domestic violence previously to see if they're okay, to check on them. And that has led to an increase in reporting as well. And just to give you a sense of that, last year, you're talking about more than 44,000 contacts in terms of following up with people. So, we know that it's happening. We know that a lot of times, women won't call even when, they're experiencing it. In fact, they're not likely to call. And that's why today's conversation is so important, because it's not an issue that can be just dealt with by women. Women across the country, as well as men, have a place in this conversation and have real things that they can do tangibly to try to make the situation better. And like I said, it's an issue without borders. We're seeing exactly the same kinds of trends in Canada. So thank you.
And just one more question for you. I was listening earlier to President Cusack, and she mentioned that point that I often find when we cover the story about, people remain silent sometimes, because I still think people sometimes don't know how, when, or if to intervene. I mean, given your experience in Canada, have you found that people are more willing to engage, even men to engage, when there are public campaigns? Or how do you convince people when it's not someone they know to intervene, to get involved and say, this is not acceptable?
I think it's hidden, and I think these campaigns are really important for creating awareness for two reasons. One, it lets women know that are out there today. I'm certain that there are women listening today who either are experiencing it or who have experienced it. It lets them know that they're not alone and that people care and that they want something to be done. That here we are together as a panel, we're talking about it, but really it's about trying to keep people safe, right? And we want to make sure that anyone that's listening is safe. So that sense of not being alone. And then the other thing that you said, even if it's not someone you know, I guarantee you that everyone on this call knows someone who's experiencing but it's hidden, right? We don't know. And so that's why I think days like today are so important. And and the systemic impacts on the family, not just the woman experiencing this kind of violence, but studies show that children, when they witness it, not only are they more likely to engage in abuse in the future, but they're also more likely to enter the criminal justice system, to attempt suicide. I mean, we're talking about something that really has traumatic effects that are they're massive on society. So that's why I think days like today are very important.
Thanks so much for the moment. I'm going to bring in the great John Meyler now. John, obviously brilliant former Cork Hurling Manager, and also now you're an MTU lecturer. And I suppose today is about what more can men do. From your own experience, John, going back and even today, is there this toxic masculinity? I mean, what do you think? What do you think drives young men who start off like little sweet boys? What sends them down that road of violence?
Well, one or 2 points that Shawna made there. It's just hereditary, really. It's in the background. If they as children see this, and then they're more likely to engage in abusive behavior later on in life. Yeah. So I think that's where that starts is in education at the primary level, engaging children within the primary school level, within the secondary school level, and now here today at the third level. So different levels of education within society need to be addressed and need to be looked at, where we can educate children starting off in school to prevent this happening, and that's through education, really.
That's so interesting. And then maybe also through people like yourself and David, through sport, because as you say, it's probably learned behavior. So if you get people who are very respected within society to say, this is never acceptable, that's probably really important too, John.
Yeah, well, the role of role models is critical in this, and you saw that with the English cricketer last week, with the abuse that was going on with banter in the dressing rooms, and what men perceive as banter to one is not banter to another. So there are huge issues within those. But 1 or 2 points I would have made with that. We need to engage men within their own space, within their own safety, within their own culture. So we need to engage men in places where they're comfortable. So that's more or less in the sports setting, in the hurling, football, rugby club, soccer club, and also in public places where men congregate as men, and they're safe in that. So I think that's where men need to be engaged and to get in there and have the discussion with men within their own safety culture. And then getting that message across. And the important thing with the message is the clarity of the message. What message are we trying to get across today? What message? What is the message? And we need to really, get that out there and be really clear and concise about it and say, this is an issue, this is a problem. How do we address it? But we need to put solutions in place. I personally don't like talking about things. I'm a solution-based person, driven that way, that we need to come up with solutions. So engaging children at the primary, secondary and tertiary level, engaging men within their own safety culture.
Really interesting, John. And on that, David, because you deal with a lot of younger guys. I know you coach the under-17s now, as well as being a brilliant soccer player in the past and captaining Ireland. Is it a difficult conversation though? Is it ever appropriate? And how does one, I suppose, bring up conversations like this?
It's very difficult, Miriam. It's quite interesting, obviously, listening to everyone speak before me. I obviously grew up, in Cork and whatever, and then I stepped into a professional environment, as my father mentioned there. You've seen the stuff with the English cricketer where one thing is received as banter or a laughing joke. I've been in those situations. I've been in those changing rooms where things are said that is received as a bit of a laugh and a joke, where it's not. And you know, Sean touched on something that a lot of it is silence. People, or I should say, really men are afraid to speak up. They're afraid to, you know, question a fellow teammate, a fellow friend, or whatever, and it becomes acceptable. Now you highlight the younger age. A massive part of that is social media. This perception on, you know, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, that things do become acceptable. And enough people don't call it out, whether, like my father spoke about education, but it needs to be more than just that. A lot of it comes from your upbringing. And then once they get into these schools or whatever, it becomes acceptable. And they need to find a way to stamp it out, because it's not, like, I'm a father of two. I have a daughter who's 5, and, you know, even listening to all you speak, to think, like, I can't imagine a world where my daughter is out in, you know, in an evening or a nighttime, and, you know, is living in silence, of being afraid, of being in fear. That even at this point worries me. That there needs to be more done. Whether what needs to be done, I'm not 100% sure myself, but it's moments like these where you have these webinars where everyone comes together, and, you know, they find solutions, and, you know, people come and they give their advice, and, you know, we can actually strive to move forward.
And the great thing is, just before I move on from you, David, is, like we spoke earlier about role models and learned behavior. I mean, you are blessed, and I'm not just saying this, I suppose, with your own father as a role model, because sometimes young boys, young men, if they don't have a role model like your father, then they grow up with the wrong type of role model, and then they repeat the bad behavior.
Yeah, of course. And that's part and parcel of it. If it had been totally different when I was growing up, that if my father was, you know, going into violent behavior, then I might have found that as acceptable. Now I look at the way my father, you know, treated my mother, and that's the way I want to treat my own wife. And I, you know, that's the way it is. They've been married. What's my sister? My sister's 36. I think they're married 38, 39 years. You know, that's the way it was brought up in my household, and that's the way I look at women, and that's the way I look at my own wife. And that's a credit. But like you said, there are many, you know, young boys who don't have, you know, male role models, and it's very difficult. And then it's a case of, do they have other family members like uncles or grandfathers, or, you know, even a teacher or a coach, as you said, through sport, that they can then aspire to be like. And that part is very difficult. And, you know, you just hope that these young boys can get, you know, the advice they need, so that this, you know, we can find a way to stop it.
Yeah, great, David. Thanks. I'm going to bring David Joyce in. David, I know you're the Equality and International Development Officer with ICTU, the Irish Congress of Trade Unions. So you have so much, I suppose, access to so many areas of Irish life. What do you think men can do to try and bring in a halt to this type of violence?
Thanks, Miriam, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel today with such a distinguished group of people. Yeah, that's a big question, Miriam. I mean, our focus, I suppose, is in the workplace, and I think we did a survey actually back in 2 years ago now, November 2019, on the whole area of sexual harassment in work. And interestingly, there was a whole range of behaviors described, like verbal abuse, unwanted sexual jokes, comments of a sexual nature about, you know, people's appearance, clothing, and then less, but importantly, more severe incidences of, you know, unwanted sexual touching, and indeed serious sexual assault. And in 81% of those cases, the perpetrator was a man. And that's, you know, I suppose part of the reason why we're here discussing this today. And in terms of workplaces and workplace culture, I mean, we've talked about dressing rooms. Well, workplaces are far from perfect either. 80% of the victims of those incidences I described took no action at all. And 1 in 4 of those who did, only 1 in 4 of those who did felt it was taken seriously or dealt with satisfactorily. And you might ask why? Well, things like, you know, a fear of a negative impact on people's careers, the belief that they wouldn't really be listened to, or they might be blamed in some way. And a small number of people didn't even know that they could report, and that there were actually protections in law that exist. So I suppose we do have good protections in employment legislation here in the Employment Equality Act, etc. But there's a need, I suppose, for more urgent action to tackle the problem, make sure that workplace policies are well known, and that there's, you know, some education and awareness raising about them, and that there are procedures in place to address situations when they arise, and also consequences for employers who kind of fail to live up to their responsibilities in this regard as well. So I guess all of that would help to create a culture where, as I said, you know, 80% of the perpetrators are men. That you know, we can engage men in a conversation that this kind of behavior in a workplace setting is simply not acceptable.
Were you surprised, David, that in 2022 so few people complained or reported it? It's pretty staggering, isn't it?
It was one of the findings that shocked us. I have to say. You know, that you know, 4 out of 5 people just wouldn't report an incident as serious as sexual harassment in the workplace, because the impact that has on the victim in terms of their you know, their performance at work, even their fear of, you know, of getting into certain situations in workplace settings, etc. Has an impact not only on that person, but also on whatever the enterprise they're working in. You know, so it's not only the right thing to do. There's a good business case for employers to actively work on this issue as well.
But it must also be partly that people don't say anything for loads of different reasons, but also because they're not sure anything might be done about it, or would be received well, or would be taken seriously. I mean, I suppose we all know sometimes things happen to us and think, oh, will I say anything? And we weigh it up. But for that number of people to not bother, 4 out of 5 doing anything, they must at the end of the day also felt employers, perhaps even though it's in legislation, maybe they don't feel enough's going to be done about it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the important things in this conversation is the definition, if you like, of sexual harassment and you know, violent harassment in the world of work. And it's not about practices that you know, may or may not be offensive. You know, it's about the impacts that they have on people. So, you know, somebody might make what they consider an inoffensive comment or remark, or tell a joke in the canteen. And, you know, people were talking about banter earlier on. I mean, we're not talking about we're not talking about things that don't matter here. We're talking about behaviors, a whole range of behaviors that actually have an impact, or could result in an impact in someone. So it's something that we all need to check ourselves on.
Eve, I'd like to bring you in here. Eve McDowell, you're a great activist and you're the founding member of Stalking Ireland. The conversation is, what more can men do? What do you think men should do, Eve? What do you think would ease the pressures on this terrible blight of violence?
Well, there's a couple of things. I suppose being active bystanders is just so important, you know, identifying the behaviours and being able to say, hey, look, to their friends or peers, or just in public, being able to stand in if it's safe to do so and intervene and call it out. Because, you know, oftentimes I've been in situations, and even male friends of mine have been there and witnessed it and have said nothing. But again, there is that fear of being able to do it. So I think that if we see an increase of everyone doing it and them all taking part, leading the way, it'll make it easier for them to do so. And I suppose a lot of things link back to consent and understanding boundaries, communication in relationships and in friendships, understanding even down to people's past trauma and things like that, and understanding their wishes. Another thing is, as we were talking about the banter earlier, is making jokes about serious situations or minimizing the behaviors. I always give the example that I was on the way to Leinster House and told the taxi driver that while I was there that we were introducing a stalking bill, and the taxi driver's response was, sure, why wouldn't you be stalked? Aren't you good looking? So this kind of national attitude towards these behaviors and the lack of understanding, what the impacts have on victims. So even just educating themselves on how these behaviors, and talking and listening to females in their lives and beyond, and just having that general understanding is so important.
But as John Meyler said earlier, he's interested in solutions. So if we were to try to be practical and useful today, as well as having an interesting discussion, Eve, I mean, what practically can men do to make the situation better? In other words, we all talk the talk, it sounds great, but in practical terms, what can they do?
Well, I suppose, the onus a lot of the time is on women to look after themselves. We're constantly, texting our friends before we go somewhere. These conversations have been had, a lot recently. But I suppose it's changing the conversation to telling, I think even just starting with talking to maybe younger boys at a younger age about, I think it all links back to consent a lot of the time. Understand the understanding of people's boundaries, knowing how to treat people respectfully. Those conversations should be had at a much younger age. And again, back to the active bystanding, not just ignoring it, being able to stick up for people and actually make a difference, and taking the time to educate themselves, because it's great to see so many men on this, webinar today. A lot of webinars that I've been at before, you see it's primarily women. And even when our bill was at the house of the Shawna, only two men, I think, came and spoke, and the rest were women. So I think being involved and being just as interested, because, you say, a lot of people call it, gender-based violence or violence against women, but we should all be working towards trying to end that. And I think that's why this discussion today is brilliant and definitely a step in the right direction. Even being involved in things like this, or even if there's men watching, I think that's a brilliant step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, what about the fact that, I suppose I might put this to Sean and to Dr. Coxon, because from the Guardian, Sean's point of view, one of the questions here is, the fact that there is such a low level of reporting, and we even, deduced that from you, David, talking about workplace events, what have happened, and also the very low levels, I suppose, of incarceration of perpetrators by our criminal justice system. I'll start with you, Dr. Coxon, if that's okay. In Canada, what's the experience there? I mean, I suppose a lot of the time maybe women don't speak out, don't go to the Garda here, because they feel at the end of the day they'll be shamed in the witness stand, and then nothing will happen to the perpetrator because so few go to prison. What's the Canadian experience?
Yeah, I would say it's very similar. It is the same, but I think the other thing to consider is that once it's reported, they can be checked on, by the guards here. But the other thing is, both in Ireland and in Canada, there are intervention programs at lower levels. Meaning, a lot of people are afraid. There's it wasn't that big a deal, and they have different thresholds for when they think it might be a big deal, right? And usually, because you're in it, you don't see that it's a much bigger deal than you think. You're really hoping that cycle of violence where things get out of control and then they're in control after. It's very confusing, right? So both Canada and Ireland have interventions programs for men to really help them to understand their behavior and to be supported in recovery, right? So I think that that's important too. When we talk about things that men can do, I think the conversation around bystanders is so important. But there are programs out there. If people are in the cycle of violence as someone who is doing it and are ashamed, because that we've seen seen that happens, that there are places that they can go to get help. Because, you know, it really is, as Sean said, about being your best self. And you know, in that moment and after that you're not, but a lot of men don't know where to go either. So, I mean, you know, there's different things, not just criminalization in terms of going to jail in the scale once you enter the justice system, but there's things you can do outside of it as well. Thank you.
Have you noticed a big difference, Shawna, here and in Canada? Do you think, to be fair, the approaches are quite similar to how our Garda are trying to deal with this gender-based violence and how they deal with it in Canada?
Yeah, I think it is different. I think there's societal differences, while the approach from a policing perspective is quite similar. I do think that, you know, Irish society, and this is as someone who's new Irish, just having arrived here, it's just a little more conservative, and people know each other, you know, generationally. You know, that the question of where are you from? I was like, why is everyone asking that, right? But it's, you know, because people know each other. And so there's, I think, more shame, more stigma around reporting, because, you know, you can't just move to another city like you could in Canada. You could move to another city close by in Canada and nobody would know you, right? So I do think it's a more challenging thing to deal with here systemically, and all the more reason for days like today and creating awareness and programs to support people so they can get out of it. Yeah.
And Sean, that similar one, I suppose, about the fact that people don't report enough, women in particular don't report when things happen. And also, is that partly, do you think, Sean, from what you glean, that there's very little punishment sometimes at the end?
Yeah, I think there's kind of multiple reasons why there's not reporting. I think for me, certainly, I think the outcomes for when an individual reports are just not very good. Any kind of when you get into an adversarial scenario, especially at the upper threshold of this activity in terms of major sexual assault or rape or domestic violence, the outcomes for both parties, for both either the perpetrator or the victim, are very, very poor when they enter into that adversarial situation, and it's difficult. And I think people they back away from that because it is traumatic in many ways. But I think as well that there's other reasons why they don't report, and I think the critical one is around shame. I think Sean has mentioned it there. I think, you know, and also the issue of victim blaming, which is another aspect that kind of that's brought into the equation there. So there are multiple factors around why people don't report, but I think more importantly, I think it's about getting back to those issues around preventing it happening. And for me, certainly, John has mentioned about education and schools, but I think, you know, we have to go further with that. I love the conversations around what should be happening around the kitchen table and the fireplace. Not that there are many of those anymore happening in Ireland. When you sit down and you have that conversation, and then it's part of what's happening in the home, because we have to look at what the statistics are saying here. Okay, over 80% of kind of sexual assault and serious sexual crime, it's happening to women who are, and the perpetrator is known to them. So this is not some bogey person outside around it. It is people that they know each other, and therefore there's a fundamental shift there in somebody's mind that allows them, I think, that this is an appropriate thing to do, that I'm entitled to this. To a certain degree, I'm entitled to do this, that this is okay behavior. And I think one of the amazing things that I remember hearing our president, Michael Lee Higgins, one day saying at one of his famous garden parties, and he talked about like violence is learned behavior. And so therefore, as a society, we need to try and unlearn that behavior and create the conditions for where we can deconstruct those notions of what those harmful masculinities are, and those harmful attitudes and cultural different phenomena that are there. So for me, very much going back into the home area, certainly schools, but it is about creating those spaces for where we can engage men and boys in a positive way, for them to actually kind of come out of these scenarios with really good intentions to be their best selves and to be their most authentic selves. Yeah.
We also know, though, David, you were a member, weren't you, of the workers group who negotiated the ILO Convention number 190. I think it's the new international legal standard on violence and harassment in the world of work. Can you bear to share with us a little just what the convention is and what your experience in negotiations were like? Just tell us what it is, actually.
Sure. I suppose firstly to say it's when I hang up my boots as such, it's one of the things I look back on with most pride and enjoyment of having been involved in. And I have to say, it was a campaign led by trade union women mainly, from right across the globe to introduce an international instrument, if you like, that made the right to be free from violence and harassment in the world of work an international one, a global one. So we have, as I said, we have standards already here in Ireland and Europe, and indeed we've ratified the Istanbul Convention in the Council of Europe, but this one is a global one. So its importance is in that it has the potential to provide protections to mainly women in workplace settings right across the world who don't have the kind of protections that we have in this part of the world. In terms of what it is and contains, I mean, we don't have time to go into great detail today, but it establishes that right I mentioned to be free from violence and harassment, including gender-based violence at work. It has definitions of what we mean by violence and harassment. It covers all workers, irrespective of contractual status, interns, volunteers, job seekers, and all sectors, public and private, and recognizes that women workers are disproportionately impacted, and basically requires governments to implement, to introduce laws and regulations and policies to prevent violence and harassment and to tackle it. And just let me finish by mentioning that it also includes the issue of domestic violence in there. And you might ask, well, why is a workplace convention concerned with the issue of domestic violence? And it recognizes, of course, the impact that domestic violence can have on workplaces, and requires governments to take appropriate measures to recognize this, and insofar as is reasonably practical, mitigate its impact. So we have affiliate unions here in Ireland, for example, the FSU, the Bankers Union, have negotiated workplace policies on the issue of domestic violence and how the workplace can be a support to people experiencing domestic violence. And indeed, the government has committed to introducing paid leave for victims of domestic violence as well, and that's something we're working on with them as well.
And you mentioned earlier, David, some research and surveys you've done, but could you spell out for us, I suppose, in dealing with violence and harassment in the workplace in Ireland, it too have conducted, haven't you, research and surveys on the scale of this challenge?
Well, not so much on the scale, because that's a much bigger kind of research exercise, if you like, that we don't have the resources to carry out. But I mean, international research would suggest that 1 in 3 women will experience some form of sexual harassment during the course of their working lives. And then, so our survey was really about the experience that people have once that occurs, and all of the issues I raised in the previous intervention apply, in terms of the kinds of behavior, the fact that very few people report it, and why that might be in terms of fearing the impact it might have on their career, etc.
Brilliant, David. And John, I know the government is currently working third national domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. You're a lecturer in strategy. You're someone, as I said earlier, you've worked with men in sports for decades. What would be your advice to government and I suppose other relevant stakeholders in terms of strategies in engaging with men and boys to end gender-based violence? Like if you were sitting in front of the Taoiseach or the minister, what would you say to them? John, are you there?
Apologies. No, if I was sitting in front of me, Hall, I would say to him, look, we need to develop partnerships. We need to develop relationships. We need to develop alliances, with men, with groups of men. And I think that's the key point, to engage them and to get the message across then in those partnerships, in those alliances, where we can get the message of violence across and trying to educate people then. But I think the key point there is partnerships, relationships and alliances with different groups.
Yeah, which is interesting. I think it's great though that MTU is the first, white ribbon university. Do you think that's important, John? Because I suppose if it's all over the university, it will make a young 18-year-old young man think about it. They mightn't even know what it's about at first, but it'll make them think.
But we have 20,000 students in MTU, and the point of the white ribbon is that there are huge benefits to society. And I made the point earlier to you about education, and you're educating young men at 20. Probably the average age would be 18, 19, 20 years of age. So to prevent this going forward, I think that's the key point. It has to be solution driven. It has to be really dealing with partnerships, educating the third level, that where we are at the moment today, 20,000, young fellas that can be educated. And the social life in college on a Tuesday, on a Thursday night, and that we want to stop the violence towards women then in social settings then, when young fellas of that age are in college. So it's all about partnerships, Miriam, but it's also about the language used and about communicating that, and really listening as well to third level. And I think that's the point. Another point about the strategy would be a community-based strategy, where we instead of bringing men in, we go out to men. I think we need to go out to society. We need to go out to communities and get our message across there. But open channels of communication. I said in the earlier point about, through sport, really, that's where men really engage with men, through sport. And that's one of the key points. You get into social settings of pubs as well. So there's an awful lot of different strategies you can use. But it's just getting them done and starting them off. That's the critical point.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And David, from your point of view, I suppose as well, when you've got young men in front of you, what's the best way to get men more involved, especially young men?
I imagine you have to try and paint a picture for them. If there was their own daughter, sister or mother, if they were in that situation, how would they feel? That not just because this woman that they don't know, that it could be deemed as acceptable. It's obviously going to be very difficult to, even as my dad says, going into that environment to deal with, say, in sport, but it's to break that sport culture, to get men to open up, to get men to accept that, there needs to be change. Because yes, that is probably the best place to go, but it's also the place that those people are most comfortable. So if you go into a group of 30 people or 30 men, it's going to be very difficult to get them to open up and to be able to share with one another what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, to change that, outlook of things. But certainly, I think the biggest thing is for anyone watching this or anyone who will watch it is you have to, if you are a man, you have to look at yourself first and foremost. Are you doing the utmost to, help women feel more safer, and start by educating yourself and, try to make yourself a better person?
Do you know what's great though? Because a lot of the people on my panel today, David and John, are involved in this area, whether it's the Garda or Sean, or I suppose David tangentially through it too. But you're not, David. So why was it important for you to get involved in something like today, to give of your time? Like, what is it within you that makes you realize this really matters?
Well, I think it started off with the president, speaking about the figures, and going through it and listening to Sean, etc. go on. And I'm not, Miriam, I'm not oblivious to what's going on in the world. But when statistics are put in front of you, it is an eye opener. You don't realize it, and to think in the workplace 4 to 5 women, you know, they don't report it. Can you imagine what that person is going through in their work life?
Mhm.
You know, and that's obviously one case in, you know, their social life. If they're out and about and they don't feel comfortable, they don't feel safe. I don't, like me personally, I don't have that problem, but I like, that's why it's so important that not just myself, but for everyone else to get involved, because I don't want to think that, you know, I've got a sister, I've got a wife, I've got a daughter. I want them to be comfortable. I don't want them to be looking over their shoulders, whether, you know, if my wife is out for a walk with my daughter, I don't want her to be looking over her shoulder thinking, you know, God, I need to be in a lighted area, whatever. I want her to feel, you know, be comfortable, be safe. So that's it. That's why it's important for, you know, everyone to get involved. You know, everyone can do something, everyone can help along the way, and they can make a difference. You know, if you believe that you can't, then you are, you know, part of the problem, because every man, every woman can help to, you know, make it more safer for women, and we can educate people. But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And just before, I don't want to go back to you, but John, similarly, you know, it's not an area you work in. You are a lecturer in MTU, but have you noticed, even John, over the years, that in the past, maybe people probably never spoke about it, John, did they? Even, you know, in younger circumstances in sports areas. Is it good that now at least people are talking about it, and it's great that people like you and David are involved?
Yeah, certainly. When I was involved first as a lecturer in RTC at the time, that was 30 years ago, there was no kind of harassment or gender issues, workforce diversity, really. That wasn't on the topic 30 years ago in organizational behavior and that. And, you know, over the years, then it started to come in. So it needs to be in the programs in college. It needs to be in those business courses. It needs to be in where, you know, people are going into the workplace, and people are educated through third level. So maybe, you know, we have the CIT module, creativity, innovation, and teamwork. Maybe if there was more about, you know, about these issues within that module, or President Cusack would instruct the registrar's department to put a module in there, you know. But it's just raising an awareness, it's raising issues within the different programs, Miriam. That's it, really, you know. And it's quite simple to put a module in there, or you know, these modules into programs, really, to build up, you know.
It sounds a really good idea, actually. Eve, I didn't want to ask you it initially, but I suppose for people watching, and for me in the panel, how do you define stalking? And is it a form of gender-based violence? And how common is it, Eve?
Well, I suppose it's hard to define stalking, but a common definition that's used is that it's a pattern of unwanted, intrusive, and persistent behavior that's motivated by a fixation or obsession that would cause any reasonable person to feel fearful or distressed. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, so we use the acronym FOR. So behavior that's fixated, obsessive, unwanted, and repeated. And there is such a broad range of different stalking behaviors. Some that if you would isolate them, that they wouldn't appear to be harmful, like, for example, the sending unwanted gifts. But I mean, if you have a whole range of behaviors happening, it's about adding up that pattern and seeing it. So it would relate. So in the terms of research, we have no research yet in Ireland on stalking, but it's not all doom and gloom. I can say we're delighted that there is a survey coming out in the next few weeks that we're backing through UCC. It's just been approved by the ethics committee. So we're hoping that, you know, within the 16 days of action, that this will be released, and it'll kind of, you know, give us an idea of how prevalent it actually is in Ireland. But I suppose just from people getting in contact with me, I could not predict how prevalent and how serious this problem was in Ireland. It really is shocking. And if we're going off statistics in England, 1 in 5 women will be stalked in their lifetime. And yeah, which is huge. And, you know, Dr. Rachel Wheatley over there did a study, and it was found that 90% of the time the victims are female, and nearly 90% of the time the perpetrators are male. And interestingly, and what we've seen is that even men that are being stalked, a lot of the time they're being stalked by other men. So there's still so much to uncover with that. And I think it's generally a new conversation that's being had, but it does link as well to coercive control massively. Like, there's a lot of similar elements there. And in England, over 50% of cases are domestic cases. So whether that, you know, the relationship still be ongoing, or whether it follows the breakdown of a relationship, So yeah, it really is only starting to be discussed widely now, but we're really hoping that this data will, help us uncover how big the problem is and help raise awareness, and so we can start figuring out how we're going to tackle it.
It sounds like a massive problem. And for people who might know that much about Stalking Ireland, how long is it going, Eva, and why did you get involved?
Well, myself, I had my own experience when I was back in 2017, 2018, I suppose it begun. So I was a college student at the time when I met this person. He was just living in the same college accommodation as me. No major red flags there other than, he was a little bit strange, and people had said to me that he had fancied me and he had said a few weird things about me. And then there was a couple of times that I thought that maybe he was following me, and told myself, no, I'm probably just being paranoid. And I remember Googling like what is stalking and stuff, and I couldn't find any information about it in Ireland. There was no website whatsoever, no help, no indication of what exactly it is and how it can happen. No specific stalking law. So, again, that all minimized the behaviors and didn't really validate my experience. And it gradually escalated to him attempting to gain entry into my house and shaving off his beard, eyebrows and hair, and was in the bushes below my bedroom window. At that point, the guards became involved. I suppose they didn't really know how to handle it either. I remember asking for a restraining order, and they were like, you're not going to get one of those. There's something from American TV shows. So, I mean, that feeling of helplessness and isolation, I suppose alone, because I hadn't heard of any other cases. I thought that my case was a one-off case. So then I had to go through the court process. He'd be sitting directly across from me in the court, sometimes just centimeters from me, and smiling at me through the court. And yeah, after that, I tried to really forget about it and move on and just, forget that it had happened. But then one day I was in work and I heard about Una Ring's case. And although our cases are very different in some ways, there was more similarities than I had ever seen before, and she was so bravely speaking about it on Claire Byrne, and I went back and watched it and I thought, oh my God, I need to contact this woman. So we managed to get in touch. And when we spoke, the first thing we said was, isn't it ridiculous? There was no website, no information, that we didn't even name it as stalking ourselves until much deeper, because if you look back on articles or on my court case, it'll say it went on for a few weeks, when in fact it went on for 2 years, but it just gradually got more serious over time. But I just didn't have the tools or the resources to be able to identify it, and neither did the Garda at the time. So I suppose that's why we really wanted to set up the website, and the social medias came with that then, and we launched the petition, which now has over 13,000 signatures, and I'd urge everyone to sign and share. But a bill has been drafted with the help of Lisa Chambers and Catherine O'Sullivan from UCC, who's also involved in the research. That's now at the second stage of the legislative process, and it seems to have cross-party support. But the response from the Department of Justice has been that stalking behaviours are encompassed in the current harassment laws, whereas we feel it's so important that we need to name it as a crime because it's validating experiences. And in my case as well, like, I was never directly contacted, so there's a lot of loopholes there. The harassment bill, is a bit difficult for people to understand. Like, there's a word setting, and I suppose stalking cases had been prosecuted under that. But things like, we've had people contact us where their ex-partner has attached a GPS tracker to the car, and that's not recognised as illegal, or the guard said, well, there's no law against that. So we really wanted to bring things like that in. Again, the interfering with someone's property to cause harm and to scare them. A lot of the time we see threats to pets and things like that. So yeah, we really wanted to bring all the cases that we had, discussed and experienced into that. So we're hoping now that that bill will move quickly through the houses and that it will get passed, because it's so necessary. And like, that's only the start. Like, criminalizing it is just the first step. It's been criminalized in neighboring districts for over a decade. So we really do want to focus on rehabilitation as well, because at the minute nothing's being done about that. And studies in the UK as well said that there's a 20 to 65% chance of reoffending post-release, which is scary. So again, yeah, we're really looking to focus on rehabilitation, early intervention and prevention as well.
I'm so sorry you went through that experience. I might bring Deputy Commissioner Coxon in. Is this something you're, not obviously Eve's case, but this whole area of stalking, is this something in relation to gender-based violence you're becoming more aware of?
Yeah, we've been through this similar journey in Canada where we had historical laws under watch and beset that were quite antiquated, and they were more meant to be around more like general harassment. But and Eve, I echo Miriam's comments. I'm so sorry that's happened to you, and I can tell you that it is more prevalent than people realize. It's scary behavior. It is prone for reoffending, and it is something we need to talk about. It's ironic we're having this conversation, although perhaps not. Literally 2 days ago, I had a friend of mine, a personal friend, text me from Canada around having a device that's been put on their vehicle by an ex. And I said, yeah, you got to go in, you got to report it. It's illegal. It's illegal there. So, and that would be in Canada. So this is, it's more common than I think people realize. And, it is terrifying, quite frankly, to think that this kind of behavior that you're describing, Eve, is happening. And sometimes the law takes time to catch up with what we understand socially in society's behavior, same with technology, etc. And this certainly is a really important space. I agree.
Absolutely. And Sean, just listening to Eve's experience there is so traumatic and really very upsetting. If she hadn't seen Una maybe on Claire's show, she might never have known that this happens to other people. Is this something you're aware of, Sean, in your organisation down the years?
Oh, certainly. And I think the biggest issue there, I certainly see, is about the validation of the experience. I think that's a critical area that, one of our key works, whether it be with female victims or male victims, is around validating the experience and saying you're being heard and we've listened to you, and this is something that you need to we want to support you in kind of overcoming and moving your way through it. So absolutely, with that's where we come across that kind of situation on an ongoing basis. And but I think I was really struck by what John was saying when we're talking about what more can we do. And there's a great saying about, in terms of community development work, we talk about taking people where they're at. And I think that's the thing about, we need to kind of engage with men and where they are at, about kind of reflecting on this behavior, or reflecting on these attitudes. I think, and to do it in a way that allows them to kind of say, oh God, this is crazy. Why am I thinking this way? This is not appropriate. This is what I need to change around that, because that's a pattern, like in terms of what's happening with Eve, and that it's a pattern of behavior of that happens there on a continuous basis there, that creates the abuse really there, and for somebody to think that that's okay for them to do that is really it's a very, very difficult certainly for victims like Eva to have to deal with. But I think it's something that can be looked at, whereby individuals and men can actually reflect on their behaviors and their attitudes that would actually make them think twice about that. And also the other bit is around that aspect of stepping up, and as a friend, that person didn't live in isolation. He has a mother and a father, he has brothers and sisters, he has friends, so it's really incumbent upon people around that individual to encourage, to call that out, to call out those behaviours and address them as well. So it is a collective that we need to engage in here in terms of dealing with this as a society. And I think as a society, we have a very, very benign acceptance of violence per se across the board, and I think we really need to acknowledge that and reflect on that as people generally, and to do something about it, to say it's not acceptable, and to address those certainly with younger children, introducing them to concepts of what a healthy relationship is, introducing them to the notion about what it is. I remember being in the school one day, and I remember hearing a teacher asking the question, you know, what makes a good friendship for you? And it was a really interesting question to hear a 6-year-old answer. Okay.
What did he say?
Yeah, well, what she said, and then her friend beside her said, well, basically, I know that he is there. I know that he is there when I go out to the playground. I know that he is my friend. I know that he will be nice to me. Very, very simple language, okay? And this is type of the language that we need to be kind of introducing into schools so that young people get an understanding of it. And I think we do need a program that goes from Montessori right through to third level. That is a continuous program, that is aged appropriate, that deals with the issues of sexual health, that deals with the issue of sexual identity, and deals with the issue of consent, healthy relationships, all of these things. It needs to be a dedicated program that is continuous and longitudinal throughout a young person's life up until they get beyond college education as well. And on top of that, then it needs that program of work at the home where we introduce, like I've often thought about the clunk click trip. I don't know if people remember that from the safety belt campaign, putting on the safety belt. There was a national campaign for people to kind of start wearing safety belts. So it was clunk click every trip. And I think that would be brilliant to have a statement that is addressed the issues of violence and domestic violence and sexual violence in that way, that embeds it in people's minds and as a national campaign. So therefore it's actually heard around the fireside, the kitchen tables, as well as in the schools and in the workplace as well.
That sounds a great idea. What do other people think, Nicole, about having some kind of a national campaign like that? Maybe John or David, first of all, on that?
Yeah, I think it's I said earlier, Miriam and Sean as well, it's getting the message out there. What message are we trying to get across here? What are we trying to do here? And ultimately to prevent, to stop, to educate men to stop violence against women. So it's to get that message out and then get it out in, you know, one little vision statement of what's our vision, what's our raison d'etre really. You know, so it's a one line punchline really. And getting that message out there.
Yeah, and David, do you think that would work? Like, because as you say, you know, as David said, the clunk click worked very well. So maybe a simple message. I don't know what it would be, but it could work, like a public awareness campaign, a bigger public awareness campaign.
No, it can definitely work, but at the same time, you need to get a lot of people behind it and to push it. Yeah. That's the only way it's going to work. Now, obviously, I come from the sporting world. If you can get enough sport people, whether it be men or women of high profile, to push that, along with schools pushing it, then definitely, yes, it can work. In terms of the slogan, I'm not sure what, with the clunk and click, I'm not sure what it would be, but certainly it can, yeah. But you need the right people in the right places pushing it. That goes across the whole of the country, all the way up into the government, everything. It has to be one driven goal, and that's the only way it will work.
Well, it's identifying, David, it's identifying a role model. It's identifying a role model and getting the right message then. And that to put the two of those together and you're away, you know. That's it.
And I suppose key role models is someone like a David, isn't like a sports person that younger guys look up to and older guys respect.
Yes, Miriam, but at the same time, it's got to be more than just a sports person, or you need a collective group of people across, you know, you need to cover all angles, every sport, everything. It should nearly be a whole host of, you know, role models. Even in terms of, you know, women standing up and like listening to Eve there, like that's heartbreaking to hear. You know, it's really tough to hear, but what an amazing woman to come forward and, you know, share her story and be able to speak about it so openly. And as hard as it will be for the women, you need that. The more voices and the more stories that get out there, the more that, you know, men know that there needs to be change. They need to step up and do more. I spoke earlier about, you know, reflecting on yourself first and foremost. I'll do that after this. I'll think of my being the best man I can be. And I imagine anyone listening will do the same, or you should do. So there's an awful lot that can be taken from it.
So interesting. And I mean, Eve, you know, as David was saying there, what you did was remarkable, coming forward, being public. How difficult was that for you to do?
Thanks. Well, you know, when I was in court, I wasn't even able to read out my victim impact statement. But I think what motivated me was Una doing it. And what motivates me now is I'm the person that's speaking for the people that can't speak. There's some other people that want to speak but have ongoing cases and things like that, and they're scared that if they speak publicly about it, that'll impact the outcome of the case. And so yeah, like, I mean, it can be very difficult, but I think it was so important, and someone has to do it, as we say, especially for those who can't. And I do think that there will be a lot more over the coming years, and it's about bringing that collective together. And as well, what's amazing is that some of the responses that I've gotten is that some people didn't necessarily realize that they were stalked or what their experience was until they heard me speaking, or Una speaking either. I had an 80-year-old woman disclose to me that she was stalked twice before, and only now did she realize that that's what it was, and that all the struggles that she had in life and all the impacts that she had, that, you know, I spoke about the impacts it had on me, and she said, oh my God, they were the same, and that's what that was. And she was always made to feel as though these came out of nothing, and, you know, wasn't treated with respect because of the mental illnesses that it brought, or I don't want to say mental illnesses, but impacts, you know, she was made to feel as though it was a mental illness, when in fact something really traumatic had happened to her twice, and because she wasn't validated, didn't understand what it was, and wasn't supported. You know, it's just not, it's so unfair to hear stories like that, but hopefully now we're moving in a positive direction.
That's really very moving as well, Louise, that a woman of 80 would feel, looking back now, that she had in fact gone through something like you. It shows how, apart from it being important that you yourself have spoken at, it's so important for her, because it probably places all the stresses and anxieties she's probably lived through her life, why they happen.
Yeah, it's about that validation again, you know, what we were speaking about earlier, it all definitely links back to that. And again, that's why it's so important that it's named in legislation as a crime.
But isn't it great, Eve, before I just go back to Deputy Commissioner, that as we come towards the end of this call, that so many men are on this call and they want to, you know, to be able to do more, that people, especially men, want to join in to stop this horrible, vile pandemic of violence in our country.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's great. There has been a great response, especially over the last few months. There's definitely been a societal shift, I think, since the Sarah Everard case, which is brilliant to see. But we just need to make sure now that it doesn't lose momentum, and it doesn't take another person being killed for something else to change.
Deputy Commissioner, when listening to all you've listened to today, what do you come away with? Obviously, all the men on the call and all the men who've signed up to watch this show that they really want to be able to do more.
I think it's really encouraging, because this is not an issue that can be dealt with without a whole of society approach. In other words, you know, men are a part of the solution. They need to be. And even, you know, listening to you, Eve, and talk about your experiences, and, you know, the sense of the importance of those who are bystanders and the role that they play. I mean, I've heard other victims in a very personal way say that the largest betrayal wasn't just what happened to them with the person that committed the violence against them, but it was that, you know, people stood there and did nothing, right? And that there were people who could have intervened. And that in some ways that felt like more of a betrayal. And so I think this is such an important conversation. I'm so encouraged to see so many men participating on the panel, and I know that there are many men out there who are watching this as well. And yeah, I think it's all part of the solution. I find it very encouraging. So thank you.
And we spoke earlier, though I don't think I spoke to you about it, about maybe public awareness campaign. Did you have those in Canada at all? You know, campaigns to make, I suppose, men and women more aware of this gender-based violence. Do you have public campaigns like did you in Canada? Is it something we should think about here, do you think? I'm not hearing. You're on mute, I think.
My apologies. There
Yes.
we go. We did have them in Canada. They're very successful. In fact, one of the most successful ones we had was quite disturbing in nature, and it resonated with people because it really brought to light, how awful and traumatic these things are. So I'm all for whatever creates public awareness. I loved the discussion. Again, I found it really encouraging, and I know that there's public awareness campaigns here. Certainly, in the next 16 days, you're going to see more of that as well. But there's always more that we can do.
When you say the one that was very successful, because I'm interested in that, was quite hard hitting, what do you mean by that? What was it about?
Yeah, there were pictures and visuals of women who had suffered gender-based violence and who had been abused. And so it resonated with people in almost like a vicarious trauma kind of way. So then there became a lot of discussions around, was that ethical? Is that the way that a campaign should be run? But at the end of the day, it got more discussion than anything that I've seen before or since. And it is traumatic. It is, it's not less traumatic because it's happening behind closed doors and we're not seeing it. So it's interesting that the seeing it caused this vicarious trauma, right? So I'm not advocating for that here. I'm just saying that that's what happened there. And whatever it is that's done, the dividends in terms of results is really around the awareness, and that's what's important.
And in terms of violence and gender violence, in terms of LGBTQ Deputy Commissioner, that's an area you're also aware of in the Garda Síochána, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that, we talk about, the difficulty in coming forward, whether someone is LGBTQ2, it's that much more difficult. And sometimes there's fewer resources. And I mean, you heard Eve talk today about not even being aware at first, like, is what I'm experiencing, needing that validation. It's even more difficult when you start to get into communities where, there's just different challenges and it's not as prevalent in the population. So it's not happening less in other communities. In fact, in some ways, you could argue it's happening more, depending on what it is that the issue is. But we need that awareness as well, and unique, bespoke supports for those who are suffering.
Sean, given your important role as we come to the end, what are you hoping? I mean, not just about White Ribbon, but over the next few days, and tomorrow, of course, being an important day, what do you hope might be achieved?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'd hope that a lot of men would go and take the pledge never to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women. That'd be the ultimate. I think as well, it's really encouraging to have the likes of John and David, because in terms of, when we talk about modeling, and I think their relationship is astounding, and having read the various extracts of their books and talking about their own experience and their own experience of their love for each other and their pride in each other. I think that they are fundamental modeling examples that we need more of. And I think we have found ourselves, even through COVID, men stepping into more caring roles and understanding their role and wanting to be in that space. So like for me, it is very much around creating those spaces for men and boys to be able to reflect on their own behaviors, reflect why they think that the way they do, so they actually can be active change, social agents for change for themselves and also for the communities and the women that are in their lives. And I think that, to me, is a critical thing to do. So the more of the likes of David and John and David Joyce as well being here today, the better. And of course, having the experience of women who happen to have experience of abuse is really a fundamental stories that need to be told and get out there, because they become realities for people then.
Could I just cut in there, Miriam? Sorry, I think, Sean, you've come up with a quote there, because when I was a child, I was brought up in Wexford, and we were all said, sign the pledge, give up the drink for, the pioneer pin. And I think you just hit the nail on the head there with your quotation. Take the pledge, men, take the pledge.
That's really good, actually.
Men take the pledge with the white ribbon. Like I had Mum would always have given me the pioneer pin. My father didn't drink, even though he had a pub, and he had that pioneer pin up here, and that was a symbol of you didn't drink. So the white ribbon, take the pledge, Sean. You have it. All the money.
Yeah, I think John is right, actually. And how would it work? So how would it be like a pioneer pin? But then a lot of guys, John, or Sean, they mightn't want to wear it all year round. I think pioneers did wear it all year round, did they, John? Did your dad?
But it was a symbol, Miriam. Like, you know, when you went to mass on Sunday, do you know what I mean? The first thing you saw was Dad always made sure the pioneer pin was here, and his brothers, like none of them drank, like, and you know, if you saw somebody without a pioneer pin, you kind of nearly call him an alcoholic or whatever, like, you know what I mean? But just the point he made, take the pledge. So men take the pledge with the white ribbon, or put that into a logo if you had a design person, you know.
Yeah, and this is, of course, if you can see, I'm wearing the white ribbon, so that is the badge.
Yeah.
In some ways, the white ribbon is very much there and reflects that pledge. And I wear the ribbon all the time, I might say. And I got approached one evening on a train by a woman who then disclosed a situation that she would have had, but she felt safe with me to tell me that because she could see the white ribbon. So it's also a symbol of allyship as well, and support to women who have had experienced it as well. So
I think that's a great idea. What do other people who have not John and not Sean think about that idea? I mean, Deputy Commissioner, first of all, what would you think about the idea of some kind of a campaign around play?
I think Sean hit it on the head when he said allyship. You know, I think that's really important to see something that's symbolic. And that's, by the way, why I love the White Ribbon campaign. I think it's so important. And we talk about the challenges with, you know, bystanders who don't act, to know that there's somebody that's taking a pledge or wearing a ribbon, that there's support, that they're an ally. I think that's very powerful.
Really good. And what about Eve, David and David? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. He said, what was it about committing and not? So don't condone, commit.
Never to commit, condone, or remain silent. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, it'd be brilliant. I think that could work really well. Hopefully something will be done now after this. It would be great to see something come from it.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'm wearing my pin today, and I will wear it for the next 16 days as part of the 16 days of activism campaign against gender-based violence. And can I also, one of the things I forgot to mention just very briefly, one of the things that the government can, of course, do at this point in time is to ratify ILO Convention 190, because it's one thing agreeing it internationally, but governments around the world need to ratify it. And the more governments that do so, the more persuasive it becomes. I put in the chat a petition there that people could use to ask the government to do that.
Can I just say, I know we're coming towards the end, Miriam, and I know that there's been a person behind the organisation of this, along with MTU today, that has a couple of things to say, and I'd like to, if you could bring him in, which is Colm Kelly Ryan, I'd really appreciate it to kind of maybe help him wrap up where we are today as we land after a very, very quick hour and a half. I may add. It's rushed by. So cheers.
Good idea. Yeah, Colm, who put all the work into it, as well as MTU. But Colm, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miriam. My name is Colm, and I'm the head of programs with the Men's Development Network, and I'm the coordinator of the White Ribbon Ireland campaign. I'd just like to begin by personally thanking you, Miriam, as a White Ribbon ambassador, and you have been for so many years, for moderating this very interesting discussion. And to our panelists, Eve, Deputy Commissioner Coxon, Sean, David Meyler, David Joyce, John, thanks for lending your voice at what is, like you said, Miriam, a critical juncture in the battle to end domestic, sexual, gender-based violence against women and girls. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank a very special group of people: the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Office at Munster Technological University, and in particular their manager, Siobhan Kangataran and Ellen O'Shea. We are in a pandemic, we know that, but I must say that their passion for human rights, equality, diversity and inclusion is infectious, and it's infectious in a good way. White Ribbon exists in over 60 countries worldwide. It was founded in Canada in 1991. And White Ribbon Ireland is a campaign led by the Men's Development Network. We're dedicated to ending gender-based violence, and we do this through education, capacity building, and awareness raising, which engages men and boys from a strengths-based and an evidence-based approach. Ahead of tomorrow, which is International White Ribbon Day, I would urge everybody out there to support the campaign by texting the word White Ribbon 50300. White Ribbon to 50300 to donate €4 to what is a very important campaign. And also to take that White Ribbon pledge, to be brave. It's a brave step. Post it on social media. I pledge never to commit, condone, or remain silent about violence against women and gender-based violence. But to close from my end, today is a very important day for White Ribbon Ireland. It's a very important day for Munster Technological University, as you become Ireland's first White Ribbon University. Now we have commenced a 3-year programme of work on embedding principles and structures within the university to end gender-based violence and violence against women. And I would like to thank MTU, and in particular President Cusack at MTU, for your support of White Ribbon. And I would like to really warmly say, welcome to the White Ribbon family. Thank you, Miriam, and thank you everybody at home.
Thank you, Colm. So I think I'll just say thank you to everybody. I found it fascinating. Thanks to you all for giving of your time. You're all very busy people and you gave of your time. I found it fascinating. Thank you all very, very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Equality, diversity and inclusion EDI ensures fair treatment and opportunities for staff and students. So by promoting equity, every individual has an opportunity to make the most of their lives and talents.
Equality, diversity and inclusion is embedded across everything we do at MTU. Our staff and students come together to identify and tackle the many barriers to inclusion so that we can achieve our full potential.
The structures here genuinely are really supportive for people from any background or any disability. So everybody's welcome, no matter what their background, what their creed or colour or ability, and that it's opportunities for everybody in an educational friendly setting.
For me, as a member of the LGBT community, inclusion at MTU is about more than flags and slogans, even though those things can be important. It's about understanding that a person has a background and qualities that are important and which can be taken advantage of to allow a person to achieve their full potential, not despite their background, but rather because of it.
Inclusion to me means equal opportunity and access to reach your full potential, and this was my exact experience at MTU.
Inclusion to me means that you are included in different activities, no matter your ethnicity, culture, skin color, or disability. I am in many different societies because I love to work with different people, and I have found that the societies especially have been extremely welcoming, so MTU is a great place to make friends.
One thing around equality, diversity and inclusion that's very important to us in the UNESCO Chair is the opportunity it presents to educate a generation of students to tackle exclusion and to tackle inequality. That would really be the power of a transformative education in action.